We begin here tonight in the nation's capital with the historic arraignment of a former president charged for actions he took while in office. Donald Trump pleaded not guilty Thursday inside a federal courthouse just blocks from Capitol Hill, where his alleged conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election culminated in a violent insurrection on January 6th. Our Robert Costa has more.
Former President Donald Trump took on his critics after he left his arraignment in Washington.
This is a persecution of a political opponent. This was never supposed to happen in America.
He traveled to the federal courthouse under heavy security, escorted by his Secret Service detail. Throngs of protesters and fans gathered outside. Once inside, he was processed, but no mugshot was taken. Inside, Trump was fingerprinted. In the courtroom, he raised his right hand to be sworn in. He stated his name and gave his age as 77. He pleaded not guilty to 4 charges brought in a grand jury investigation being led by special counsel Jack Smith, who was also in the courtroom. 3 counts of conspiracy, 1 for obstruction, for allegedly leading a criminal conspiracy to try to overthrow the 2020 presidential election. The judge told Trump the obstruction charge alone carries a maximum of 20 years in prison. Former Trump attorney Tim Parlatore says prosecutors have an uphill climb, proving Trump knew he lost.
Did he know at the time that the claims of fraud were false? Did he know at the time that he'd actually lost the election?
The indictment says Trump deliberately disregarded the truth, a view shared by former Attorney General William Barr.
I have come to believe that he knew well that he had lost the election.
Sources say Trump's lawyers plan to argue that Trump's false claims about the election were not criminal, and that his efforts were driven by the advice of outside attorneys like Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and John Eastman, among others. CBS News has learned that they are likely some of the 6 alleged co-conspirators cited in the indictment.
And Robert Costa joins me now. Bob, we've been around a lot of plexiglass tables recently. Tell me what you heard or your reporting tells you about how the former president's reacting to all of this today.
This is the 3rd indictment he's faced this year, and he remains the front runner in the Republican presidential race. So on the political front, they're moving forward. This is a campaign that has a lot of confidence, but legally they're facing so many variables, including in Georgia, where a possible 4th indictment looms.
And is he, he's faced so many of these legal challenges in one form or another in his life, not arraigned as a former president. We've talked about that quite a lot, but he's been in his career through some legal challenges.
There's an old story told about former President Bill Clinton that when he wanted to express his displeasure, he would say to a reporter, nice tie. Just a little comment like that. And the way former President Trump said his age today in court, 77. That's his own way, based on over a decade of reporting on him, of kind of twisting the knife a little bit in a very, very gentle, non-overt way about this proceeding. He's having a little fun with how he says his name, and he's trying to project, based on my conversations with his friends and allies in the last 6-7 hours, that he doesn't take this that seriously. He wants to show up. He doesn't want to be seen as trying to avoid this interaction in federal court, but he doesn't want to be seen as nervous or tense about the proceeding.
And finally, what kind of pretrial motions are they going to try to file to delay this?
They're already signaling in Trump's legal team they're going to try to delay the trial as much as possible. They want to have an extended discovery period. They believe they have the right to talk to as many people as possible involved in the January 6th case. Of course, there are hundreds, if not 1,000 people plus involved in the January 6th episode across these numerous fronts. But the special counsel has called for a speedy trial. We'll see what the judge ultimately decides to do with scheduling, but it is going to get complicated regardless of when it takes place because the campaign's just starting to heat up.
Yeah, and so many other trials as well. Bob Costa, thank you. For more on what happened inside the courtroom, let's bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane. So, Scott, give us a sense of the temperature, mood, the vibe inside the courtroom Thursday.
Unlike when we watched him in the courtroom in Manhattan and in Miami, he really was sizing up the room today. Looking through the crowd, I tried to identify people, glancing in the direction of those who took the seats behind him, the wooden benches in courtroom 22. And among those on a wooden bench in courtroom 22 was the special counsel himself, Jack Smith. Former president stood when he said, not guilty to those 4 charges, those 4 felony charges. But otherwise, he was seated, kind of hunched over, as he was in the previous 2 hearings. Once again, he showed up with a navy suit and a red tie, turned his body to the left to face the judge, who was actually over his left shoulder, and otherwise was facing the prosecutors in what will eventually, potentially be the jury box.
I imagine there was no interaction with special counsel Jack Smith, who he talks about at such length and in such derisive terms on the campaign trail. Was first confirm that I'm right about that, and then was there any of the normal pleasantries that sometimes happen in these even contentious cases between the lawyers on both sides?
Nothing between Donald Trump and the special counsel's office or the special counsel himself. No, those pleasantries didn't exist. But it really does underscore something else, John, when you ask that question. The judge, as one of the many routine boilerplate questions she'd ask at an arraignment, says, Mr. Trump, anything you say can and will be used against you in these proceedings. Do you understand? And he said, yes, which just strikes you because you know he's going to talk about this case. He did as soon as he left. And he also, on his way out of town, in his remarks, said some disparaging words about the District of Columbia, calling it dirty and boarded up. And I've made the commute between Washington Reagan Airport and this courthouse many times. It's not the part of D.C. or any part of any American city that fits the description he just made. It's the federal complex. It's the most regal, egalitarian part of Washington, D.C. But you wonder how that lands, because he's putting his fate in the hands of a District of Columbia jury if this goes to trial. And the case shifts now, John, to District Judge Tanya Chutkan, who I've watched at proceedings champion the District of Columbia, talk about its rich history. She is one of its most proud citizens. So these comments he's making may not fall on deaf ears.
Scott MacFarlane for us outside the federal courthouse in Washington. Thank you so much, Scott. Trump's next hearing is set for August 28th before Judge Tanya Chutkan, who will now oversee the case. But the former president won't be required to attend. CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe joins me now. Rebecca, Bob Costa reported earlier that the president's lawyers are going to be trying to delay, look for discovery. The House January 6th committee report was 800 pages, not to mention all the transcripts of the interviews. Do you think the president's lawyers have a good case for delaying just to be given the time to sort through all this voluminous material?
I think they do. In most federal cases, it takes a while to go to trial, and this case is no different. If anything, it's slightly more complex, and there's the added complexity of the defendant being on the campaign trail if it drags on that long. So I think it will be unlikely, though possible, of course, that this goes to trial before the election, but it remains to be seen if the judge really wants to push this along and the prosecutors do as well. It's possible it could happen.
Former President Trump was the only person arraigned on Thursday, but the special counsel has named 6 co-conspirators in the indictment, hasn't charged them. What do you make of that decision and the potential strategy behind it?
Yes, I think that there are 2 possible reasons why he framed the indictment in that particular way. One is possibly to try to put pressure on those individuals to cooperate with the investigation. The investigation is ongoing. He's still building his case. He obviously thinks he has a strong enough case to go forward, but prosecutors always want the strongest case possible. So if one of those if one of those co-conspirators chose to work with the prosecutor, I'm sure he would be very happy, and that might be one of the strategies. The second reason is that if he were to have brought an indictment against all of those individuals, that would have added complexity on top of complexity and delay. And so I think part of the strategy here is to try to move things along. His only chance of succeeding in getting this trial accomplished before the election would be to put off those other indictments until afterwards.
And finally, Rebecca, there is this question of the special counsel's obligation to prove what was going on in the former president's mind, that he knowingly lied. What is the threshold there? Does he need to have a witness saying, I saw him say out loud that he knew that he'd lost? Or is it sufficient to say here are 60 instances in which he was told there was no evidence of what he was claiming, and yet he continued to claim it?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is no, you don't need to prove somebody's subjective intent through a kind of smoking gun, direct evidence, words or written words that they might have said. You can prove it through circumstantial evidence. So if somebody has been told repeatedly that the election was not stolen, then the jury is capable of inferring from that, even beyond a reasonable doubt, that that knowledge exists. But of course, it's complicated by the fact that there were other lawyers who were telling him otherwise. They were telling him, no, this election was taken from you, and these are lawful measures that we are taking in order to get it back. And so that's going to be a challenge for the special prosecutor to meet.
Rebecca Roiphe, thank you for helping us sort through all that. We appreciate it.
Thank you.